Welcome back to another explainer. So today we're going to look at something that might literally be sitting right in front of you right now, a cup of tea. But, we aren't just going to stare at a warm mug. We're actually going to deconstruct it and uncover a pretty startling historical truth that's hiding inside your everyday cup of Assam tea. Okay, think about this for a second. Who really brought tea to India? If you're like most people, you probably have this heavily romanticized picture in your head, right? Sprawling, perfectly manicured British tea estates, colonial architecture, maybe some very polite afternoon tea times. We kind of just assume that was the absolute genesis of Indian tea. But, well, as we're going to discover today, that picture is missing a massive, vital part of the story. It's crazy because the actual historical reality completely shatters that whole colonial narrative. The common belief is that tea culture in India was just this purely British colonial import, something established out of thin air in the 1800s. But the truth? Indigenous tribes in northeast India, like the Singpho people, had actively been brewing and consuming tea for centuries. We're talking possibly since the 12th century. So let's dive right into Section 1, the myth of British tea, uncovering the true origins. Section 2. India's original tea artisans, the Singpho tribe. Right, so way before massive processing factories or huge colonial enterprises even existed, the Singpho people of northeast India were already utilizing the native Camellia sinensis plant, specifically the Assamica strain. They call their traditional tea falap. And the linguistics here are actually super interesting. It comes from fa or ka, which translates to what, and lap, meaning leaf. So, what leaf? Local community legends passed down through generations say two exhausted brothers were wandering around, chewed on this unknown leaf, and it completely rejuvenated them. Literally, what leaf is this? And I should mention, this isn't anything like your standard grocery store tea bag. Falap is a highly distinctive bamboo-smoked tea. The artisanal process for making this is it's incredibly intricate. First, they take these young, tender leaves and heat them up in a metal pan until they turn brown. Second step, they sun-dry them for several days. Then, and this is the really cool part, they pack those dried leaves incredibly tightly into hollow bamboo tubes. Finally, they smoke these tubes over a fire for about a week. The tea actually hardens into the shape of the bamboo and takes on this rich, deeply smoky flavor. And apparently, it stays good for years. All right, Section 3, breaking the Chinese monopoly, the British discovery. Setting the scene here, it's the early 19th century. The British East India Company was absolutely desperate to break China's massive global monopoly on the tea trade. They were scrambling, actively looking for alternative sources they could control themselves. Then, in 1823, a British adventurer named Robert Bruce learns about these wild tea plants directly from a Singpho leader, Chief Bisagao. Honestly, this local botanical knowledge was an absolute game changer. By 1834, the British saw the massive potential and officially formed the British Tea Committee. And just 5 years later, 1839 hits, and we see the very first London auction of Assam tea. And wow, that auction changed everything. Assam Souchong sold for a whopping 16 to 21 shillings per pound, which at the time was enough to spark massive, immediate commercial interest. It was a total capitalist success story in London. But, and this is the crucial turning point, that booming financial success in the West was built on some incredibly harsh realities back in India. Which brings us to Section 4, the planter Raj exploitation, the human cost of the boom. Cultivating tea on this kind of massive industrial scale requires an immense amount of labor, right? When the local populations flat out refused to work for the terrible wages being offered, it brought about this brutal systemic exploitation known as the planter Raj, basically the absolute rule of the plantation owners. To get workers, the British relied on recruiters called arcadis. These arcadis would prey on marginalized, drought-stricken communities in places like the Choto-Nagpur Plateau, and they'd use these starkly false promises. They promised sweet water, beautiful green gardens, better marriage prospects. Some even disguised themselves as government officials. But the reality that actually awaited these workers, it was grim. Harsh, grueling labor and cramped coolie lines, corporal punishment, strict confinement, and being tied to inescapable, often totally illegal contracts. And here's a really stark statistic to wrap your head around. 1 in 4.
Because plantation owners couldn't actually rely on a free market to attract women to do this work, the colonial government stepped in and passed the Transportation of Native Labor Act in 1863. This law legally required that for every group of immigrant laborers brought over, there had to be at least one woman for every 4 men. The system specifically targeted women because, sadly, they were seen as cheap, reliable, and absolutely essential for the delicate process of plucking the tea leaves.
Section 5. Voices and Jumor Songs, Folk Records of Resistance and Memory. These women, who were systematically treated as voiceless commodities, found a really powerful way to express themselves and push back. The rich tribal history of Assam's tea workers is actually preserved in the rhythms and dances of Jumor folk songs. These originated from the Chowta Nagpur Plateau and basically traveled with the migrant workers. They became a vital oral history and a profound emotional anchor. It takes all this dry historical data and colonial legislation and grounds it right back into the visceral human experience of these tribal communities.
You can really hear this history in songs like Chol Mini Assam Jabo. The lyrics go, "O Jodrum, you lied to us and sent us to Assam. You deceived us and lured us to Assam." I mean, when you hear those words, you can instantly feel the deep sense of betrayal. You can feel the profound disillusionment of workers who were just completely tricked into this migration.
And these songs didn't just express sorrow. They documented the systemic abuse. Another line goes, "Sardar says work, work, Babu says catch the fool, Sahab threatens to peel the skin off my back." This isn't just a song, it acts as an objective, historical record. It documents the strict surveillance, the physical abuse, and that rigid, oppressive hierarchy that really defined everyday life under the Planter Raj. So, to summarize, these Jumar songs are incredibly important because they capture truths that official documents just glossed over or completely ignored. They detailed the traumatic displacement from ancestral lands. They record firsthand experiences of deceptive recruitment, the struggle for daily survival amidst incredibly harsh labor conditions, and above all, their unbreakable cultural resilience and solidarity. This cultural preservation matters immensely to our understanding of the tea industry. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't just about exports and shillings, it was about human lives. We've really covered a lot of fascinating ground today, haven't we? From the ingenious bamboo-smoked falap of the Singpho tribe all the way to the haunting, resilient melodies of the Jumar songs. So, here's a question to leave you with. Whose legacy are you actually tasting the next time you brew a cup of Assam tea? Just take a moment to think about that layered heritage, the indigenous craft, and the enduring human spirit hidden right there in your everyday beverage. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.